Thank you for listening to this episode.
And follow the podcast on social media by finding @PrestigiouSPod. And if you'd like to be coached on how to live a more prestigious life, you can reach out to me, Chris Bean, @ChrisBeanOfficial, or by emailing the podcast directly at prestigiousinitiative@gmail.com.
Lastly, sign up for our newsletter either through social media or on our website.
This is the Prestigious Initiative. Welcome. I'm Chris Bean. Today I have a guest who's all about helping people break free from limiting beliefs and creating a life they've always wanted. Kyle Smith is a clarity consultant and the developer of a unique system called Neuro Linguistic Somatic Experience, or NLSE. Kyle, welcome to the show.
Dude, thank you very much. And thank you very much for the awesome introduction.
Well, Kyle, so let's give our listeners a little bit of insight about you and kind of what brought us here together.
Well, insight on me, let's say, that's a really broad question. Do you have something specific on that one?
Well, so I've done a little
couple
bit of
things
research
came to
about
mind.
you, but my listeners have not. And so, yeah, we're going to have we're going to dive into all the different things that you are kind of about. But I want to give my listeners kind of an idea to know a little bit about you, a little bit of a taste before we dive a little bit further on your journey.
Sweet. So yeah, I'm a clarity consultant. That is something that I shifted to after 13 years as a personal trainer in the fitness industry, personal trainer, online coach for nutrition as well. And the pivot is simply going from physical fitness and training people's bodies to developing people's brains, either from a conceptual way where we're diving into our words, stories, or breath, or from a physiological, a neurobiological way where we're developing parts of our brain in order to support us in pursuing where we want to go. And that came from a very, I refer to my life as post World's Toughest Mudder in 2016 and pre World's Toughest Mudder, because that was a very, very huge point where I was able to release all the pent up energy, frustration, anger, shame, those negative feels, doubts. I was able to, through this physical activity, just break it down in order to build it up. So I was breaking down the body to build up the brain. And I didn't realize that at the time. So it's pretty cool reflecting back on it. And it happened, it was something that I just committed to myself. I told myself, I made the decision to make a pivot, which was the very first thing that anything leads to. We're just an accumulation of our decisions. We are a micro decision away from being a completely different pivot point in life, in a completely different experience. So the more that we can accumulate these awesome decisions, while, there's time for fun too. If you want to make a not so good decision that is not ill-intentioned and does not have any negative side effects on anyone else outside of the subjective individual, and you have good vibes going into it, why not? Because who doesn't want to have an occasional party every once in a while? Outside of that, there's the accumulation of decisions and they compound. There's compounding interest to these decisions. So 2016, that's where I made the huge pivot point to focus on making my own decisions rather than allowing others to make decisions on my behalf.
All right, so dive into your backstory here just a little bit before we move on. I like the physical aspect and then combining the mental aspect of that. So a background about me, and some listeners know, but maybe not everybody. My day job, evening job, really is a professional martial arts. So I teach martial arts for a living, and I've done that now. I've been training since I was 11. I got a work permit from school when I was 14, so I could start helping to teach the classes. Now I'm second to the owner. I run the school. I get to write the lesson plans. I get to do all of the stuff. And the wonderful thing is I have had the unique opportunity not just to structure the program in such a way that I get to say what moves we're doing and how we're doing them, but also when and how the character development is built into it. Because it's more than just kicking and punching. Our motto is we're teaching today and tomorrow's leaders by instructing them on more than just kicking and punching, right? So it's martial arts by default has these things in it, but if you're not thoughtful, if you're not purposeful with how you're delivering that message to everybody, then it can get lost. It can just be a byproduct that just kind of happens, sort of. But if you actually dwell on that and in fact structure programs that you see where the students come in at, and you know where you want them to be at, but then you give them the steps along the way. You give them the ladder so they can climb to the top to reach whatever it is that you want them to reach at. So I really like that kind of background that you have, and I can understand at least a bit of that as far as the physicality, and then bring in the mental aspect of that as well.
Totally. And I think that's really cool because the way I frame things is in stories, because I go with a lot of stories. So something I really like about what you said, this is what I saw as you were saying it, was you're creating the plan, which is the trajectory, and you were putting in the hero's journey within that training, like a subliminal or behind or like a backdoor lesson
Sure.
that just sinks in over time.
Hmm.
I think that's cool, man.
Yeah. No, all right. So let's get back to the neuro linguistic somatic experience. Can you tell my listeners perhaps what is that? What does that entail? And how does that kind of differ from other personal growth methodologies that are out there?
Totally. To start with the last one there, because it'd be easy. The way it differs from other modalities is that it has the combination of the mental and the physiological. So we're hitting 2 points. So a lot of activities could be going to the gym, going to martial arts, going to wherever, and you could be mindlessly doing it. So you don't need to be mindful while you're doing it, unless you're like really into it. It just doesn't, you don't need to. And then on the opposite end, where we're absorbing knowledge, but we're not applying that knowledge and we're not practicing, then that information's useless. The difference between knowledge and wisdom is the practical experience between the 2 points.
Hmm.
And so when we have both of those working together, then we're able to go with a full physiological and energetic change. And energetic could be the emotional body, emotion, energy in motion. And so that's how it would differ. Um, when it comes to developing each on the physical parts, so the brain, there's the area of the brain known as the mid-anterior cingulate cortex, and that's the part of the brain that scientists are believing seat the house of willpower, or house the seat of willpower, or is the part of our brain responsible for our will to live. And this is done by going into things that we don't want to do to develop that part of our brain so that we increase our desire to live. And you can see it the most prominent in elderly folks that are in their 90s. So then we go into the energetic body, the emotions, and that's stories that have been accumulated over a lifetime because the energetic body, our emotional body, is timeless. It's not bound to time. And so that differs from our physical body, which is time bound. If we cut our finger, it's going to heal over time. So that's how it would differ. It has a good combination between the conceptual and the physiological. It has both rather than just one or the other. And it's done on purpose with intentionality, and the side effects and what happens on the other end for folks just happens, and it's anticipated to happen rather than it happening accidentally. So, neuro linguistic somatic experience, breaking it down, neuro meaning of the mind, and specifically mindset. I consider this a mindset gym for mental fitness. And I say mental fitness rather than mental health because I believe that when we say mental health, it's ignoring the other side of the coin. If we're only focused on our mental health, we're ignoring mental unhealth. We're ignoring the things that are making us unhealthy. And so when we have fitness, we can have elevated fitness, we can have higher fitness, or we can have lesser fitness. And so that's developing the mind. And then mindset, we understand that developing mindset is very important. Everyone wants to develop their mindset. I'm working on my mindset. I'll just have a little bit more time to work on my mindset. I'm really focused on working on my mindset right now. When we don't have a practical working definition, what can we contrast that? What's our reference for mindset? So I define mindset as the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves and our opinion of ourselves, which leads to both self-respect and self-love. So we dive into the neurology of our thinking. We think about our thinking. And that way we give us the opportunity to be able to pivot our thinking to make better decisions, to make better behaviors, to make better life. So then we go into linguistics, and that's language, and that encompasses the what we say, what we think, and what we write, and also how we breathe. The breath is the language of the body. So starting with the first ones, words, and going with a fitness reference, we have the building blocks of our body, which are carbs, fats, and proteins. These are what develop the body, and we can adjust these macronutrients in order to get a different result from our physiological for our body. Words I view as the ethereal macronutrients of the mind. If we feed our mind quality words, we're going to have quality thoughts. If we feed our mind shit words, we're going to have shit thoughts. And so when we can become more mindful of our words and we can transfer or translate things from soft talk to solid talk, an example of that would be soft talk would be could I could make it to the party for 5 p.m. I'm probably going to make it to the party for 5 p.m. I might make it to the party for 5 p.m. I kind of want to go to the party at 5 p.m. Like, these are all ambiguous. They're indecisive. We don't know if we're going to make it for 5 p.m. We have no clue because the decision wasn't made. So we're not primed. We're not action prone to doing a thing. And so we transfer from soft talk to solid talk. I'm going to make it to the party for 5 p.m. period. And at least we make a decision. Now, if someone's indecisive, like they are truly undecided, it's like, let me go look at my calendar, look at my schedule to be able to see it, then that's an appropriate time to use soft talk because it's actually being honest rather than using soft talk to make it so that the other person doesn't feel bad for you saying no. So instead, just say no and they'll understand. There's no reasoning to back it up. It's just something you're not into. So don't do it. And if you go, then frame it in a way that you're going to have a freaking blast. That's fair. At least you made the decision, either this or that. And then you don't need to think about it. It doesn't take any more space in your brain. It's done. And then how the breath is the language of the body. If we're breathing high and tight, we're good to fight. If we're breathing low and slow, we're good to flow. Now, this will happen naturally. This is our way of priming our body for action. And sometimes our body wants to prime itself for action and get ready to fight or flight, even in situations set in settings or contexts where there's no threat at all. So if we're sitting and we're chilling, and then we recognize, whoa, why am I breathing? Why am I holding my breath in my chest? Am I stressed out? No, there's nothing going on. If they're thinking about something else, then that could be the thing that they would be stressing themselves out about. Outside of that, though, you can recognize, okay, well, we're good. You're safe. I'm safe. Breathe it in. Bring it down. And at least you get the opportunity to say back to your body, yo, we're good. Because the lungs and our breath is the only part of our autonomic nervous system that we can control ourselves. I'm not able to hang out here and say, okay, hold on a second. Yeah, I turn my heart off for 3 seconds. That doesn't happen. And so everything else is on autopilot for our physical body, and our breath is where it's both on autopilot and in our conscious control. So our breath has a huge power behind the things that we get to experience. And the breath is also the very first skill that we learn when we're born, and it's a skill that few practice. And it's one that when we're done, when we used up that skill, we're donezo. We're donezo. That's it. So when we get to have that breath and that communication between the brain and the body, then we have a chance to create space, like Viktor Frankl says, in between stimulus and response, where we have an opportunity to decide. And I believe that space to be presence, and to be present is to simply be here. And there could be things going on outside of your control, outside of the 5 feet radius or 5 foot radius. However, if you're not dealing with it, don't think about it. Or if you're not actively participating in the problem solving, then it's clearly not an important enough problem for you to think about. So remove it or reject it, or figure out a way to mold the story so that it works for you rather than against you, so it's helpful rather than harmful. And then you can feel better even if the story seems stressful. And so that goes into somatic, and somatic is of the body. And like I said, it was breathing. Breath work is a huge component. NLSE is a combination of story work and breath work. That's the two combinations, or that is the combination. And so somatic, being of the body, it's not just the physiological body, it's the energetic body, like I mentioned earlier, where our physical body, we can cut our finger and it's going to heal. It knows how to digest by itself. The heart is just beating by itself. All of these things are time bound and they're doing their own thing. We don't need to get involved. The energetic body, the emotional body, the body that we hold our stories and we feel our feels, are timeless. They're not time bound. So we can take stories that were from the far past and in the far future and bring them into the present and feel in correlation to those stories that popped up. It could be a form of anxiety where it's the anticipation of future pain. There's a story that hasn't happened that you're telling yourself could happen while it's not happening. So it's creating misery, self-inflicted misery. And so then what we do with the energetic body is, a way that I like to think of it is, if it's the energetic body is a river. There's a log house. What's it called? There's a log processing plant, and the stories are the logs. And the lumberjacks take the logs out of the stories, put it through the facility, and the wood can turn into chairs. It can turn into tables. It can turn into, so all these blocks of wood, all these logs are stories that we can turn into something. Now, over time, if we hold these stories long enough, the flow of the water is going to go down. There's going to be less stories, less ideas coming down. And then over time, if they block up so much, a lumberjack's going to come in and say, oh shit, someone turned off the tap. There's no water. Oh, there's no logs to process. And there's one of two directions. One person could say, I guess we're not working for today. I'm going to go to the bar. Or the other option is to say, let's go upstream and figure out what's blocking the flow of energy, the flow of water, the flow of the fields. So we go upstream, we find dams, and we pick out the log that is responsible for holding everything locked in place. And once that's out, it creates that flow again. Now, if we want to supercharge the process, we go as far back as we can, figure out where that biggest dam is, the hugest collection of stories and themes, and take that apart, because that's going to create such a flow of energy that all those other dams are going to unlock and they're going to flow by itself. And so I call that it's a game I work with my participants. I call it putting the gorilla on the table. If someone's open to going to the heaviest story that they can think of, I am open to going into that. I'll never go into a story that someone doesn't want to go into. So if we go into that one, what we see is that the themes that we can see through our life has a huge correlation to this one moment in time. And so if we're able to process that, deconstruct it, allow it to go through us, where this practice is, we're going in to actively participate in the processing of unmetabolized emotions. The energetic body requires our participation, while the physiological body doesn't. Passive, active. And so then we're able to just remove those themes. And a fun theme that I like to use as an example is I think many folks have had that friend or have been that person or recognize this person, but they date 10 different people. However, it's almost like they're dating the 10 same person. And so you see themes that could correlate to something that they have as a story for themselves that's influencing who they pick in that relationship, or the opportunities that they pick, or the challenges, or the targets, or the goals. And yeah, from there we go into experience, and experiences that happens real time. It's crazy. That part is something that I struggle to understand, other than the fact that the energetic body is timeless. And so it takes it's a fast turnover for healing or alleviating intense stories. And it just happens on the fly. It just goes with the flow, and it's fantastic. And that's my practice.
All right.
That's
I
the one
got all
developed.
kinds of different avenues of approach and some follow-up questions, of course, from there. All right, so let's go back to the language piece of this. So the way that we as humans experience language in our head, and this connects to the stories as well, but a lot of times it is this self-talk. And when we listen to that self-talk, it is us who we're listening to. Like it's a record playing of our voice in our head. So we're going to be more apt to listen to ourselves in that internal dialogue that's happening. The thing that I have found, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this or expand upon it, it seems that when we take notice of those words and the phrases and what we're telling ourselves, and we start to structure that in such a way that is purposeful, that is helpful, that is gives us forward momentum, then that is kind of us bringing our, let's see, it's kind of a way to talk directly to our subconscious, right? So our subconscious is kind of like our background operating system for life. It is in the background, it's going, I can't do anything with it, but through that internal dialogue, if I can structure that in such a way, if I can start to underline, oh, hey, I didn't actually mean that, or I didn't want to say that to myself, and then you start to notice those things, then you can get rid of them. And I think what that does is it brings those out of the subconscious and makes them conscious, and you're doing it on purpose because it's purposeful in the moment when it's happening. And by bringing that from the subconscious to the conscious, then you're directly interacting with the subconscious in the moment. And if you can do that with forward momentum, with purpose, with intent, then you are able to directly talk to the subconscious, which again is your basic programming for who you are.
Totally. Dude, you nailed it on the head. Because what happens is whatever the information is, and I came up with I have something here where rather than a self-talk, it's a self-converse.
Mm.
And that's to rebuttal our thoughts. And so that's where we can direct them. And the thing that you said about the aspect about the subconscious, totally correct, because we hold these stories in our subconscious. Our subconscious is our body. And we are a conscious being, we have our animal being, and then we have our intuitive being or our universal being. I like to call it that, where people can go into, like 100 people can go into the same shady bar and have the same feeling of, this is not a place I want to be. And so I think that that's just information where it's like, if we're listening to it, then we get, oh yeah, okay, cool. And then the subconscious, an aspect of that connects with the brain as well, is that we have our reticular activating system. So the stories that we tell ourselves, what this was responsible for doing is seeking out information to support the stories that we're telling ourselves. So when we're telling stories, our subconscious is going to automatically be looking outside of our peripherals. Like it's going to be like seeing what we can't see, and it's going to be looking for evidence in order to support our personal beliefs, whether it's internal beliefs or externals, whether it's I'll put it as projective beliefs or reflective beliefs, beliefs that they have as expectations for others and beliefs and expectations that they have for themselves.
And,
Yeah.
and of course, you will often find what you're looking for. And if you're looking for, the negative, you're going to find negative. If you're looking for positive, you're going to find positive. And the hard part is we don't always know that we are in control of that. Like we make the decision. If I make a decision to look for and find positive things, I'm going to look for and find those positive things. But I can also do the direct opposite of that. So, okay, so that's kind of the language piece. The stories are really interesting to me because we have a really weird way of misunderstanding or misremembering times in our past, and because of that, we can overlay a negative emotions or whatever onto that story and make it seem or actually build it up to be much more negative than it was in the moment or was meant to be or however. So the interesting thing about that is like the way that, and I think that goes to how people perceive events. Like we can look at a t-shirt and you say it's red and I say it's maroon, and we can both be right because, what we see is what we see, and you're looking at something different than I'm looking at, even though it's the exact same thing. Our perception of that thing is different. And that perception is all based on on who we are and the things that we've went through up to the point that we are looking at whatever it is. But the weird thing is, again, we don't have a very good way to play back those memories as they factually happened. So I'm sure that as you're going through these exercises with individuals, this comes up. And if and when that comes up, how, I guess, okay, so how do you negotiate that very well with the client? And then on top of that, how do they then begin to perceive that event as what actually happened, as opposed to the overlay that they put on it? And maybe that's too hard of a question, and I can rephrase it or something.
Oh,
but
no, that's so cool. I like that. Yeah, that's a good one. So I'll go with the information first and then how I would present it in a session.
Mhm.
So the information aspect is I have an understanding that memories are reconstructions, they're not facts. And so that's one aspect. So there's going to be some gaps in memory, which is totally cool. If a person remembers it in the detail that they remember it, that's totally fine. Because what I get folks to do is I get them to write out the story conversationally, proper grammar, punctuation, and as if they're talking to someone else or they're seeing it on a screen. And so,
And okay, I'm gonna pause you real quick. What's the purpose of doing it in proper grammar and with those extra definitive points?
so that people don't make lists.
Okay, I see. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, all
So
right.
it's
Sorry.
to take it's oh no, it's all good. It's to make it so that it is the story as they see it rather than a list of the things that has happened to them.
Okay, okay.
So that way they actually get a broader frame because I ask for more detail rather than less as well. And people will write until they're content. I've had paragraphs, I've had a paragraph, I've had pages, and I work with them all. So much fun. So then another thing as well with how memories are a reconstruction, the thing that influences, because time is not recognized in psychology as well. And so the thing that influences how we frame or perceive past events or future events is our present day state of being. So how we feel right now is going to influence how we frame past or future. So how it ties in with the stories aspect, if someone was, I actually, I don't think it's the, I don't think it's the accuracy of the story that makes the impact. It's the meaning that the person attributes to it or have put on that story. So we actually deal with the meaning rather than the story itself. The story is just the evidence and the data that we use to pull out the meaning and adjust the meaning. And so that's how that would work in a session. I would just introduce a frame. Like, what would it look like if actually I would just let people write. Yeah, I would let people write and then we would just explore through that because we wouldn't have to go into much detail. And if someone's resistant to sharing a story, then I won't force them to. I'll get them to title it and then we can revisit it later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Okay.
then another thing that I wanted to share on the words aspect that's fun. The word abracadabra. Have you ever heard it?
I have, yeah.
When I say abracadabra, what do you think of?
Honestly, I think of a cheesy, like kid birthday party musician, or not musician, magic, not musician, not musician. What's the word?
Magician.
Magician.
You got
Yes,
it.
yes.
There you go.
Yeah.
So that's legit. Abracadabra is an old language. It's Aramaic. And abracadabra translated to English means with my words I create and with my words I influence. So what we say, think, and write are the words that are going to create and influence our perception of ourselves and reality around us. So I just wanted to toss that one in there because it's just
well, okay.
thing.
So hey everyone, it's Chris Bean here from the Prestige Initiative. If you're looking to level up your life and unlock your full potential, I've got some exciting news for you. My recent guest, Joel Gandara, has an incredible program called 31 Days to Become a Better Man. Joel has packed years of life-changing insights into this easy-to-read book, guaranteed to help you rethink your shortcomings and redefine what it means to be a man in today's world. But that's not all. Joel also offers powerful one-on-one sessions and group classes to guide you on your journey. And he has a special offer for the Prestigious Initiative listeners. You can get $19.99 off the program when you use code PRESTIGIOUS at checkout. Don't wait. Take your first steps towards becoming the best version of yourself today. Visit 31dailychallenges.com and use the code PRESTIGIOUS for your discount. And now back to the show. I've had the opportunity to meet with another neurolinguistic programmer, which is maybe adjacent to kind of the information that you're doing. And a couple other people that are in that realm as well. And something that they told me was so before the age of 8, your brain hears these stories and they accept them as fact because they can't tell the difference between, fiction and nonfiction at that moment. And that to me was really kind of scary a little bit, powerful. But also then you like I have small children, so I have to be very specific and careful with the phrasing that I use. And I worked with kids, in my work as well. So it's very important to know the words that you do. So that abracadabra method or idea there, that's really impactful and moreover than just the basis of what that is, because that's so deep. And I think that depending on who that person is, no matter your age, if you have your spouse or your loved one or people that are inside that inner circle that you allow to affect the way that you think and breathe and smell and do everything, and they tell something to you that is belief, that is beyond belief, but you hear that from that person who you care from so much, you accept that as fact. And with that, we really have to be careful with how we distinguish those words and the phrases and the way, not just the words, but even the connotation, the emotion, the feelings that are behind those words. And perhaps letting those, like if you have something that is difficult to tell this other person and it could break them, letting them know the intention of why you're going about this, I think is wildly important, so that they don't just hear it and push it out, which is one option that they could do, or they hear it and then they believe whatever it is wholeheartedly, and they just, they wake up tomorrow as a different person because of those words that you told them. So that is, that's really, again, much more depth in that abracadabra than just the surface level, which is amazing. Again, I think that speaks that words were, and the other part is too, if you are, and I think this comes up mostly in debating. If you're debating with somebody, it is important to clearly define the words that you're using and the meanings behind them, because otherwise we could be saying the exact same thing and arguing tooth and nail, but we're saying the same thing because we have different definitions of the word. So having a very clear, definitive what this word means is important. And I have read a handful of books where they have like a glossary of words that they use in the chapter before the chapter, so that as the author is going through the book, they're using the words and they tell you what the words mean or what their meaning of the word is in that instance. Then you can read it and you fully understand and grasp the concepts that are at hand, because they tell you what those words mean. It's not mystical. It's not like you have to try to, decipher the code. No, it's just, here's the word. This is my definition of the word. Now read it in the sentence.
Totally. Dude, 100%. And so the same thing that differs me from NLP is the physical aspect. There's a lot that I really like grasp and take from NLP that I really like.
So
And then
you talked a little bit about the physicality of it. How does that show up in practice in your method?
we do a combination of breathing and reading. So I'll actually give the step method too, because if anybody does it, let me know. I'd love to hear about it. So the structure is a 4-step structure. It's 4-stepping. And the way that it works, so the first step we talked about before, where it's title the memory. and then write it out conversationally, err on the side of more detail rather than less, and proper grammar as if you're talking to someone that you're telling the story to, or you're just seeing it on screen. So then this also combines exposure therapy. So that'd be a first point of exposure where people are actually taking the story that's been lingering and cluttering up their mind. They're taking it and removing it to a 2D dimension. So we're going from one dimensional to two dimensional, which is paper or a Google Doc. And then if it's goal setting, then we turn it into a three-dimensional structure. And then what we do with that, the reason as to why it's important to take it out of our head is our brain runs similar to a computer desktop. If we have a whole bunch of tabs open, the computer is going to run slower. So we can delete some of those tabs or do those tasks and then create the space in our mind. So we start with decluttering the mind in order to throw the party. We want to make space to create rather than just trying to add more stuff on top of the other stuff, remove stuff, and then add stuff. So then we go into step number 2, and that's reading it. And that's the second point of exposure where they're not just taking it and writing it down, they're reading it out loud, and they can do it either solo themselves, because this is a practice that I use by myself often. And I encourage anyone that resonates with it to teach it to someone else, because we'll remember 30% of how to go. We remember 30% of what we hear, 50%, or was it 50% of what we hear, 70% of what we write, and 90% of what we teach. So to ingrain this practice to make it autotelic, where it's just a part of us, where we've integrated it, then we teach it. And so that's when I believe that's a full circle. It's where it goes learn, teach, full circle. It's a closed gap. It's an energy gap where it's giving, reciprocation. It's a flow. And so I believe that when folks teach what they know, that is the indicator of them being the most competent in their confidence, that particular skill set or that particular whatever that thing is that they're interested in. So when we can teach it, then we're just freaking rock stars. So second point of exposure, which is awesome. And then what happens from there? They read it. This is where peeps start to feel the feels. This is where you'll feel the emotion build up. You'll get a little bit tighter in the chest. Your throat might get a little bit tighter. And this is all normal. The body's just doing what it's supposed to be doing in this moment. And you can feel all through the body, like you can feel rage, you can feel sadness, you can feel joy. Like it's really heavy when you get that first read in. And third step, we actually read it 30% slower. So we decrease the speed, 70% normal rate of speech. And what that does is that this is the step, in my opinion, where people really get that mind-body connection, because when we slow it down, people have no choice but to eventually take a breath, because it's harder to hold our breath for a really intense story for a longer time. So it forces the breath into it. It takes that story that's been locked up, it takes that log, and it ruffles it. It shakes it up. It loosens it up. And then people will notice a difference from step 1, step 2, step 3. Step 4, we read and breathe. So at every period, the occasional comma, and sometimes and, we insert a breath. So a story that I have of mine is a banana bike, and it's a story with my dad. And so what that would sound like is, title it Banana Bike. When I was 7 years old, I remember my cousin had a driveway where we went down it to gain speed to hit jumps. I almost got hit by a car doing this twice. So we integrate the breath into the story to push out what we broke up in the previous step. And these are 3 points of exposure, or 4 points of exposure. And what is cool about that is there was one article I read where when it comes to exposure therapy, it's 3 points of exposure when people are exposed to it that they really start to like not have an issue with it, or there's no intense emotions to it, or there's no hypothetical or unclear, ambiguous, intrusive stories. It's just chill. And so I have 4 steps, and so far it's been phenomenal.
And each time you're doing that, so even in the process of writing, the people who are going through this, you have to visualize what it is in order to write it down. And you have to really, you talk about all the details, and the more vivid you can make that visualization, the more impactful that is. And so then you get a chance to relive, essentially, you're reliving that experience. You're bringing it from somewhere in your mind up to the forefront, visualizing it in as much vivid detail as you possibly can to write it down as a story. Now I understand why it has to be written down as a story with proper grammar and punctuation. And then that it brings in the ands and the breathing and all of those pieces as well. And then you put it on the paper, and by doing that, like you said, it takes it out of the mind, it puts it into the physical world. It takes it out of the subconscious. You're moving it to the conscious and then past and out. And do you find, because I've heard people do similar type of things, and this process also reminds me of Jordan Peterson's self-authoring process, which is similar
Nice.
in regards to that as well. But by putting on a physical paper, do you then have the people light it on fire or throw it away, or do you encourage that, or is that another piece?
Totally up to them.
Mm.
Because what I think there's nothing wrong with that. If someone wants to, then fire's cool. Hell yeah, do it up. If you have a bunch, make a bonfire. Fuck yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry for swearing. Uh, I would also say on the opposite, on the other end, I see the accumulation of stories. I see it as if you're seeing the weight increase at the gym. So you get to reflect back on the growth rather than look back on it with negative emotions, because you don't have an emotional intensity to it. It decreases. And the more that people read it, the less and less intense it gets.
Mm.
And so I've gotten people to do that as a practice where they read the story each morning, especially if it's a goal story where they're creating their day. Because I get people to write out what their ideal day looks like, and then we do the same frame in order to create more meaning to the stories, because it's the same frame that creates distance from intense ouchy stories that hurt, haunt, taunt, and annoy, and it creates closeness and positive meaning to what we've been able to accomplish. So I think it would be up to personal preference. I think that laying it up would be cool because it just looks cool and it's sweet, and I like the symbology and the ritualistic aspect of it. However, I would also introduce, if you want to see how far you've progressed, save the story so that you have a reference point.
All right. So let's say we brought this story from the subconscious to the conscious. We put it on the physical paper. We've done all 4 steps. Then
Yep.
there's a fundamental change in the being at that point or thereafter. They wake up
Yes,
tomorrow. They are different. They have less baggage. There's less emotional stress that's going on. There's less tabs open on their cognitive processing as they go through their day. How then do they start to define who they are moving forward from that moment, while separating them from that harmful past, but not separating them from everything else that was that happened along the way?
Totally. Dude, that's such a cool question. So cool. So something else I want to put on the four-step in part, because I think it's important. Each of those steps, ask the questions, describe the vibes. What am I feeling? What emotions are coming up? Where do I feel it in my body? And on a scale of 1 to 10, where does that intensity land? And there's no right or wrong with this. It's just exploration. And do that every step, and you'll see the feelings and the sensations and the intensity change as well.
Hmm.
So it's pretty cool. So then at the end, I'll ask them, what does this story mean to you or mean about you? And so we change the meaning of the story and we put it as a way of seeing how they've developed growth. Now, for the part that you mentioned, when we both me and the participant, it's really clear like when someone is making those changes and making those shifts, and implementing what they experience in their day-to-day life. So at some point, we don't need to go into past stories anymore because they are alleviated. So it doesn't negate the past. It creates a sense of peace to the past in order to focus on the present and the future. So then two parts that I like to go with is then we celebrate the wins, then we create goals. And I have a similar frame where the frame for goals is the target, so the focus, the frame or the story, the frame of how we're going to perceive things, and the plan or the floor. So what is it that we're doing to get there? Within this, I like to structure because you mentioned earlier that we hear our thoughts and we're listening to it. I introduce an idea of character creation. And so I have a frame where it goes the primary voice, which you and I are speaking to our primaries. You and I are the captains of the ship. We are the ones that are in control because we can speak to each other. We can make the decisions. We can interact. Then we have the two other aspects that's on the conceptual part. And so I introduce it as the inner rival and the inner role model. So it's like the angel and the devil.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an old story of two wolves where there's a kid that was feeling a conflict, an inner conflict, and asked the grandfather, "What is it? What is this conflict?" And the grandfather said, "Within us, there's a light wolf and a dark wolf, and both of them are fighting for our attention." And the kid asked, "Which of those wolves wins?" And the grandfather said, "Whichever wolf you feed the most." And so the light wolf would be the role model. The role model I define as the person that we want to become in order to get the things that we want, because we don't get what we want without changing who we are in order to get that and to earn it. We don't deserve anything. We earn the things that we want. And then there's the inner role or the rival. That's the character that wants you to stay the same. That's the person that is going to be louder. That's the person that's going to be less supportive. And that's going to be the character that's going to be more comfortable. And that's cool. However, if folks want to embody the inner role model, the person that they wish to be, the characteristics, the attributes, the behaviors, the decisions, the stories that they want to have, then we create a new frame to perceive it through. So every morning, there's an internal court case where the primary is the judge, and then you have the prosecutor, who is the inner rival, shows up with a stack of papers claiming that it's undeniable proof that you are not who you say you are. You're not the person that you want to become. You're not even working towards that person. There's all this evidence indicating it. Now, most folks may only have a prosecutor, and then they'll only have a prosecutor to listen to. Now we can have a defendant, a role model, someone that shows up with another stack of papers with an undeniable stack of proof that we are who we say we are. And as the judge, as the primary, we can see who has the accurate information, who has the information we want, who has data-backed facts rather than our own hypothetical sense of self or our own narratives based off of that. So that's how I introduce it, where it goes from declutter, celebrate the wins, then we create a character and a target in order to become that person, in order to pursue that goal.
Okay. All right. Now, I that is amazing. I love every step of the way of that, and I really like that you bring in the goal setting and the way that you go about that, and then to have the inner rival, and then the hero, that person that we want to become. Is really cool, because then, as you're telling me that, I'm reminded of like the story of the persona, where back in like Greek and Roman times, they would have to put the mask on, and the mask was the persona. And so we now are trying to put the persona on of that hero in our mind, the white wolf, the positive person in the story. So we wear that persona, and if we can wear that persona, and if we can win that court battle in the morning, or any time throughout the day, probably would be relevant as well. But the more often that we can win that story, the more likely we are to put that persona on, that mask on, and actually become that person, and then wear that moving forward indefinitely, and we don't have to go through that court battle, and it isn't as hard to fight that and get that win, every day, because you're already that person. So that is one thing that I kind of think is really interesting, is how to enact actual change in a person, right? I think that, you can change for a time. And I think that that's kind of easy to do. Like, you can fake it for a little bit, but you can't fake it for a long time. That's really difficult and really challenging to do. So then what has to happen is that faking has to become how you think and perceive you. And through your thoughts, through the language that you tell yourself, through the language that you use as you talk to other people, and through the people who you decide to associate with, I think all of those things then creates lasting change. I think that is kind of the key component of it. We have to wear that persona. We have to fake it. We have to go through that imposter syndrome. And for anybody listening, that imposter syndrome isn't something you should push away from. That is something you should embrace, because that means that you are stepping outside your comfort zone. And outside your comfort zone is where growth and all of the good things actually are. You can't win or can't grow being inside that comfort zone. So embrace that uncomfortability of being outside your comfort zone. Embrace that imposter syndrome, so that you can be that and wear that persona of the hero of the story. And then you start to think and modify the way that you think, and you modify the words that you tell yourself, and you start to modify the words that you tell other people. And for a little while, yeah, you probably will feel like you're faking it, and you kind of will be, until you can truly become that person. And that is how we lived our life from the beginning. We had to fake these things that we could do all the way, every step of the way. We had to learn from other people. We had to try it on for ourselves to see what worked and what didn't work. And then we would, okay, great, this worked. I'm going to keep doing it. And then if we can furthermore step outside that comfort zone, maybe not inside, but outside the comfort zone, then we can grow. And through that growth, through those steps of changing how we think, changing the words that we tell ourselves, changing the words that we tell other people, and then who we talk to, who we associate with, because those, I think, are some of the biggest factors of who we are as a person. How we think, how we talk, how we talk to our internal self, who we choose to associate with. Those are the underlying factors of who we are moving forward.
Totally. And I'll actually shift up some language that you got there, because I think it'd be cool. Something that I think is interesting is that I don't believe that it's a matter of faking it till you make it.
Okay.
And I would say the reason being is that when we're changing the stories to fit our narrative, then we're authoring our story. So self-authoring. It's about taking responsibility. And so when we dive into stories, we can see the characteristics and themes of hard work. I do show up on time. I am capable of this, is within my capacity to be able to do this thing. And so when we have those core themes as the foundation, where we know that we can trust ourselves, then it's not actually a matter of faking it. It's that you're becoming it. And why I would switch out faking it is because I think of faking it as imposter syndrome. And if we look at imposter, an imposter is someone whose words, behaviors, and action, words, how'd it go? Words, behaviors. Yeah, I guess actions would be actually there, because behaviors could be without the actions. So an imposter is someone who is not the person that they say they are. They're false. They're lying to themselves and others. I believe that because we do translations as well, where we take harmful words and put it into helpful words, where we take curse words and turn them into cure words. So I think imposter syndrome is often inaccurate to describe a person. They're simply just starting out on their journey, and they just haven't developed the experience to be able to have that confidence to be able to teach. So they haven't embodied it fully. So when we can adopt the behavior and we can teach it to someone else, then we know how to do the thing. And so I think it's more accurate to translate imposter syndrome to beginner syndrome. And that is what encourages us to pursue not being an imposter, but becoming an expert. And so there's a clear linear line for progression from beginner to expert rather than imposter. Because when does imposter syndrome stop then?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. I guess right. So fake it until you make it is not really a phrase that should at least be in my vocabulary anymore, because we don't have to fake it. We can rely on the series of past experience that we have for ourselves, and then we just underline those more and utilize those more and show those more to other people, so that we can truly become that person that we already have been in the past as we move forward. And as far as imposter syndrome, beginner syndrome is a much better way to look at that, because as you start out with any and everything, you're going to be terrible at it, and you have to go through that terrible time. Like, we have to accept and understand that we will be terrible at whatever it is when we start it, and we have to go through that and accept that to make it to the other side. And if we can do that, if we can accept that, yeah, I'm going to do this, I'm going to show up the best I can, and I know I'm going to fail more often than not, because that's how it happens. I have to do that in order to learn. Failure is essential to learning. Without failure, learning cannot happen, because otherwise your brain can't rewrite the incorrect information with the correct information. You have to experience the failure in order to overlay the correct way to move forward on top of that. So I'm going to show up. I'm going to fail. That's okay, because I'm a beginner. I'm just starting out at this. And perhaps when you are accepting or stepping into a new role at work, one of those mindsets is you have to perhaps even tell your team, hey, listen, I'm new at this. That's okay. We're gonna learn along the way, and bear with me while I'm beginning this new work. These are the things that I have done in the past. I have no doubt that in due time I will be able to accept and become this new role, and it's the best that you've ever experienced before. But for a little bit, we have to go through a growth period, and we'll grow together.
Totally. And that would be like, that is next level communication, where that would be, in my opinion, the highest probability decision to communicate that will yield the biggest benefits, not just for the self, but for the people around as well. Because then that opens up the opportunity to have an to be able to have a conversation and say, hey, let me know how I can improve. I can handle it.
Yes.
I want to improve. So just come to me and let me know. I
Yes.
want to do this. So I like that. That's cool, man. That's a good frame.
Well, Kyle, I got to say thank you. Thank you for joining me today. It's been such a fascinating conversation, learning about language and breath, and how our stories shape and impact who we become as we move forward. And I just want to know, before we wrap up, do you have any key thoughts or final takeaways you'd like to leave our audience with?
Mm. Yes. One that I like to share is keep up the kindness. It's my own personal slogan, mantra, whatever you want to call it. It's my bumper sticker. Keep up the kindness. And I say that in the sense of kindness being a practice rather than a feeling. We can recognize kindness. Excuse me. We can recognize kindness when we see it. And so that to me indicates that with kindness being a practice, we can choose when to be kind. We can choose to be kind. We can choose to keep up that kindness. And I don't mean that from an external standpoint only. I mean also internally. When we're kind to ourselves, we're going to be kind to others. Both the characteristics that we admire and resent in others are characteristics that we can only recognize within ourselves. So when we're able to see the kindness in others, we are also able to see kindness in ourselves. And then it just becomes a feedback loop of awesome feels.
Wonderful. And hey, Kyle, if my listeners wanted to get in touch with you or learn more about your program, how could they do that?
Easiest place to find me is anywhere on socials. I'm Dapper Dude Kyle, DapperDudeKyle. And you'll be able to find website links and everything through there.
Wonderful.
If you want to direct message me, Instagram's really quick. I'm really quick on the Instagram, and I'll send you a voice memo back. I'll be like, "Yo, what's up?" And we can chat about whatever it is that you're curious about on this podcast, or if you did the four stepping. Oh, please let me know. Please let me know.
Wonderful. As always, if you found today's episode as valuable and inspiring as I did, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with somebody who you think needs to hear this message. Until next time, stay focused, stay disciplined, and keep taking action towards your vision.